basically going to make an AP multiple choice test. You are not making a full-blown AP multiple choice test of like 4 passages and 50 questions. You're going to come up with one passage, and you're going to make a grand total of 12 questions for it. So you don't have to worry about 50 questions or anything quite like that. The passage that you choose, it's going to come from something that we've read throughout the course of the year, and it's entirely up to you as to what you want it to be. The only stipulation would be you can't use a passage that we would have already used for a multiple choice test. So there's not going to be, and what I mean by that would be the same passage that we've used. So there's not going to be, hey, I can come up with a multiple choice for like Hymn to Adversity or Invitations of Forest because we've already done those things. We've done some multiple choice, like practice ones with some things with the Capture and the Rye, but you can still certainly take other passages from the Capture and the Rye and use that for your passage. But starting with Grapes of Wrath from Summer Reading through Invisible Man, you can select anything that we've done. That doesn't mean it's all the novels and short stories. It could still be like Synthesis Sources, Letter from Birmingham Jail, Civil Disobedience. I don't think anyone's ever done a Mary Wollstonecraft passage yet, so maybe you could be the first. Pretty good for it. I have some questions actually for that one, but nonfiction tends to work pretty well, I think, so far as purpose and arguments and all that kind of stuff that you'll be doing, but you can certainly still go with any of the fictional books. If you decide to go with an independent reading book, that would be perfectly fine. Probably would be a good idea, though, that everyone within your group, if you're having multiple people, has read the book before. You don't want to be doing, The Awakening and trying to explain to someone what's going on, because they're going to have a tough time figuring out the purpose and all that stuff if they haven't read it before. I mentioned to you that you can go individually, which with some folks might work better, or you can go in groups of up to 4 people. But certainly it could be 2, 3, 4. You're going to turn in one assignment for the whole entire group. So, if it's like Kobe, Byron, and Sean that are working together, all their names would just appear at the top of the page, and that would be fine with it. So, all right?
It's been 10 minutes.
A beautiful 10 minutes it was. So you're going to come up with the passage. Mentioned you're going to come up with your 12 AP-style multiple choice questions. The passage that you select is going to be approximately 55 to 70 lines. It could end up being a little bit longer. I don't think you're going to end up being shorter than 55 lines because that's just not going to give you enough material to work with. What you don't want to do is open up a book and start counting lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because how the line count within the book or within the essay or within the paper that you have, it's probably not going to match up the same way as the line numbers would within a text. Now, the good thing is you're going to have laptops. I would say every text that we have, there's a digital copy of it somewhere, so you can kind of do some little copying and pasting in. The one thing with copying and pasting, you're just going to have to make sure that the format is going to work. We'll go over this in a little bit more detail tomorrow, but on Google Classroom, I have the AP Multiple Choice Exam template for you, and if you open up the template itself, it's basically, and you can open it up as a Google Doc, it already has the columns and the line numbers set in. So essentially you're going to copy and paste your article or your passage into here, into one column, cut some stuff from the one column, paste it into the second column, but your line numbers and all that stuff are already taken care of. So I don't think there would be a situation where you're going to be sitting there typing it up over and over and over again. When you copy and paste, you'll have to tweak some things so far as font and all that stuff, but you'll be able to get in there without much problem. So the hope would be, at least by the end of class tomorrow, A, you know who you're working with, if anyone, B, you know what your passage is going to be, and then hopefully C, you got your passage in the document so you can kind of start figuring it out. Because you got to have your passage in here before you start writing questions, because you can't make reference to line numbers until you know what those line numbers are actually going to be. All right? Any questions yet? You have 12 questions you're going to come up with. There are 9 types of questions. So starting with vocabulary and context down to effect, these are the different types of questions. The number that you have here in parentheses, that's letting you know how many of those types of questions you're going to do. So each group is going to have a vocab and context, a narration or point of view, pronoun reference, tone, diction, and syntax question, and then each group would also have 2 rhetorical purpose, 2 literary technique, and 2 effect questions. question becomes, what do I have to do for those? We'll go over that here in a moment. All right. But the number in parentheses, that's letting you know how many. So 7 through 9, 2, 1 through 6, 1 of each of those. When you take an AP multiple choice, how are your questions set up in order? Like, what does the first question ask about generally compared to like the last one? Of the passage, yeah. So like a question about line 3 is going to come before a question about line 34. This is not the order in which you have to go. It's not saying your first question has to be vocab and context, your second one narration point of view. Don't try to make a vocab question work for lines 1 through 5 if it's not going to happen. By all means, you can go ahead and move around. You don't also have to tell me which question is which, because I should be able to figure it out. If I can't, then we got a little bit of an issue taking place. And you'll probably be showing me your questions anyway before you end up, sharing your file with me and ready for me to take a look at. If you're looking at vocabulary and context questions, again, you're just looking at identifying the meaning of words within a passage. So for some passages, that'll be pretty straightforward. Byron doesn't want to do a Mary Wollstonecraft passage. Probably some words in there that would be pretty good for vocab and context. That doesn't mean, though, that it eliminates other questions or other passages. Catcher in the Rye doesn't really have any, I would say, sophisticated high-level vocabulary, but he uses a lot of 1950s slang. So you certainly could take, the use of the word grand or something as to how he uses it and have a question about how is that term used within the passage itself. So you could be taking a look at things that have double meanings. You could take a look at how maybe the meaning of a word is manipulated a little bit. You even could kind of take a look at maybe what a whole phrase means, whether it be a slang term or some kind of colloquial phrase or whatever the case may be. But you don't have to look for language enrichment words in order to do a vocab and context question. Narration point of view. You want to look at the point of view or attitude towards a particular subject of the speaker. This doesn't mean that you're going to go, what is the point of view of the passage? First person, second person, third person, because you don't really have those types of questions showing up. But you could have questions about attitude of the speaker. You could have, if you were doing something from like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you might be asking a question about, Chief's overall point of view at this point, especially if you're dealing with one where you have like an EST chapter where he's in the fog or whatnot. You could come up with different ways of trying to explain his point of view towards the subject matter that you're looking at. So we're not looking for you to go with just first, second, or third, but come up with some kind of terminology that would classify or describe what that overall attitude is going to be that the narrator has towards a particular subject in general.
So the questions just be like all of them Roman, none of them have to be like what's in these three Roman numerals.
You don't have to, and I was going to mention to you the Roman numeral questions. Sometimes people like doing Roman numeral questions. You don't like answering them, and you're not making this for someone else to take. Like, Jake's not taking your test. We're not giving it to ninth period. We're not doing cross-pollination with our assignments where first is, taking 7th and 9th will take first and you just take your own test or whatever. So you don't have to worry about answering it. Why you might like using Roman numeral questions, and I'll let you use 2 of them if you so choose. Again, you don't have to. Is folks are pretty good at coming up with questions. It takes a little while, but then you get okay with it. Folks are usually pretty good at figuring out what the correct answer is. Folks have a tough time coming up with incorrect answers. Because you don't want to go, the metaphor in line 17 through 20 most likely means, and like, the sky is blue. Yeah, probably not, pretty sure. So sometimes coming up with answers can be a little bit difficult. Well, if you go with a Roman numeral question, you really only need, if you have Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3 options, and then you're just kind of mix and matching them. So if you want to do a Roman numeral question, you can, but you're not required to. Keep in mind, you have not, at least you should not, and you won't come across in this class any AP questions when you get to option E is going to say either all of the above or none of the above. They don't make that an option, but for the Roman numerals, they will go 1, 2, and 3, or whatever that could be. So if there was something where there were multiple answers that you wanted to include, you could also use Roman numerals for that. So it's up to you, but I want you at most to just go with 2 of them just so not every single question ends up being Roman numerals. Do you have?
No,
Just
no,
waiting.
no.
He tends to do that.
I was thinking that if you wanted to come up with some incorrect answers, you could just ask Sean, and then he can tell you what he thinks the right answer is.
Wow, fire
That might work.
Still fire.
So if you wanted to go with Roman numerals, you could. It would just be up to 2. And then, Allie, the other option for some questions too would be there's always those except questions. I'm not putting like a count on those. I'd say probably 2 or 3 or whatnot. But again, you might be looking at a passage where there could be multiple right answers. So you could go, well, which type of all these literary devices are used in paragraph 4, except you could list correct answers, multiple ones, and then have that one that is not present in it. So there are some things that you could certainly do with it. Pronoun reference questions, these are those antecedent ones where it would be like it in line 14 refers back to, and then you got to list a set of options for pronouns. So it could be he, she, could be it. Sometimes it could be even places like there, where you have different locations that you could be taking a look at. Tone. Some folks have questions when it comes to tone and diction because they tend to be pretty similar. If you're doing tone, you're going to be taking a look, or when you do tone, overall tone of the passage, whereas diction, you're looking at a section of the passage. So you could classify the diction of a certain paragraph or groups of sentences as one type, but there would be an overall tone question that you would use. Allie mentioned chronological order for your questions. If you do have a question like number 4 for tone could be one, you're identifying the overall tone of the passage, you can kind of sprinkle that around where you see fit. Might be at the beginning, might be at the middle, might be at the end. But it's not that all your passage as a whole questions have to be right at the very end. But tone, you're looking at the passage as a whole. Diction, you're just focusing at certain specific places, whether it could be a line, it could be a paragraph, a couple segments of it. Syntax, you're going to be taking a look at sentence structure and patterns of the passage. For syntax and literary technique, number 8, don't forget in your big course syllabus, you have a lot of literary terms that you could look at. So you have a lot of different types of syntax that are out there. You have terms like hypotactic, paratactic, periodic within your literary devices. You also have types of repetition, anaphora, epistrophe, antimetabole that you could take a look at. So sometimes folks go, long sentences, short sentences, how do I classify it? You can certainly use those literary terms. You could also kind of take a look at, simple, compound, complex sentences, which we spent some time with early in the year taking a look at as well. So you're basically trying to identify what are patterns of the sentence structure, whether you'd be looking at a specific line, a paragraph, something along those lines. Rhetorical purpose, and I want you to think of it within the idea of a spa. Your purpose has to be what part of speech? You have strategies, a purpose, and an argument. When you do your thesis statement, your purpose is always a verb. So your answer choices, at the very least, are going to start with verbs. You could do one-word answers. The purpose of this paragraph is to inspire, is to connect, is to condemn. You also could do phrases where they would start off with verbs, but you would make sure your verb is front and center and letting us know what the purpose is. Again, whether you're going with the whole passage or you're just going with a specific part. Chances are you'll probably have one rhetorical purpose that will refer to the whole passage. You'll probably have another one that will take a look at a certain paragraph or group of lines. Literary technique, just the lit terms. Probably different types of metaphor, hyperbole, similes, that kind of stuff. The one that folks tend to have the most questions about are effect questions. For effect, you're essentially looking at how certain parts of the passage affect or what their effect is on other parts. So it's not syntax, it's not purpose, but it's how do different parts tend to work together. It could be a question like, Describe the effect of paragraph 1 and 2. Paragraph 1 might introduce a term. Paragraph 2 might give a specific definition of the term or something like that. But you're basically highlighting what are relationships of different parts of the passages with one another. Within the groups, and again, it depends how many people you have, sometimes folks will divvy up, all right, you do these kind of 3 questions, you do those 3 questions, I'll do these 3. Sometimes you'll have some members who will just work on questions, others will take care of formatting and putting them into the Google Doc and all that kind of stuff. It's up to you as to how you want to divvy it up. But again, you want to make sure that you're unified so far as what the passage is, that you're all aware of it. You do have to keep in mind that you are making questions for just the group of lines that you select. So you can't take, say you do something again with Cuckoo's Nest that does not mention the chief is paranoid or schizophrenic. You can't assume that your reader already knows that unless it's coming from the text itself. So that can sometimes be a tricky, especially if you're doing, say, like a modest proposal with Jonathan Swift, but you're not looking at the part where he says, let's eat babies or whatnot. You can't assume that the audience knows the context of the passage unless it's been part of the passage that you select. What you can certainly do with your line numbers is you could have a passage that ends up being too lengthy, but you could cut out paragraphs that you don't need to kind of include and just put the ellipses in there so kind of go dot, dot, dot from one paragraph to another. Any questions? So 12 questions total. You are going to identify what your correct answers are. Most folks are just going to put an asterisk next to the correct answer. If you wanted to do something where you put the correct answer in bold or you did italics, that would certainly be fine as well. But you just have to do something where you identify what that correct question is or correct answer. Again, you have to have correct answer. You have to have incorrect answers. You do, and Byron gave some advice for coming up with incorrect answers. It wasn't. You do want to make sure, because this does happen, usually at least to like one group I'd say per year, that your incorrect answers are incorrect. So you don't want to go, what is the literary device present in this paragraph? Your correct answer is metaphor, and you have an incorrect answer of simile, but there also happens to be a simile in there that you missed. You want to make sure that it's not there. So obviously make sure your correct answers are right, but also make sure that your incorrect answers are as well. Every question would have 5 options to it. And that A through E is already set up in the Google Doc that you can then access and share within your group. So you should not kind of mess that part up. Had a reminder down here. Questions should reflect the organization of the passage. So if you got a question about lines 1 to 10, that would certainly be coming before. You would have something dealing with lines 11 through 20 and so on and so forth. This part down here is from last year, so it has been changed. It's not going to be due on Monday, March the 13th, but it's obviously going to be on March the 12th, 2018. The other thing that would be different is this one says a typed copy of the questions and answers. I don't need a typed copy. You're just going to share one with the Mr.Kane@gmail or at students.nhsd.net. I don't want you to share the document with me until you're ready to submit it, though. No, because I did not set this one up as an assignment. I'll kind of show it to you tomorrow. So there's not one where like Allie has a file and Justin has a file and Alyssa already has a file. You'll be able to open it. I don't think it's automatically going to be shared with me. We'll fine tune all that stuff tomorrow when we get the laptops out. But it's different than the way I set up like your essays when I gave you a template for all that kind of stuff. On the next page, and by no means is this requirement, but you have 40 question stems that you can take a look at here that you could kind of use. Doesn't mean you have to state these, but they are options that you could use. Yeah. So, number 1, author's attitude toward the subject. You'd be dealing with like that narration point of view one, that we would be looking at. Number 2, what does the phrase such and such mean? And you'd put a line number by it. You'd be dealing with that vocabulary and context. When it comes to, I had a question here. There's an effect question I wanted to take a look at, and I'm blanking out where it went. 14 could be an effect question, so far as the contrast where you're taking a look at a relationship between different lines. That one would certainly work. If you were characterizing the style of the passage, this one would be more of like a syntax question, chances are, that you'd be looking at. Main point of the passage would kind of be like a purpose, as would like number 7, number 8, those would all certainly work. Number 9 mentions a specific allusion. That could be used as like a literary technique where here's an allusion, are you able to explain how it would be working throughout? So there's just a variety of different types of questions that you would be able to use, but again, it's not that you have to pull specifically from these. 18 was the one that I was looking at for an effect. What does the author achieve by juxtaposing, two different phrases? That would also be an effect question that you could certainly pull from. Again, you don't have to use the wording that is here, but at least kind of gives you an idea of what it is that you could take a look at. I would also suggest take a look at, listen up, you got a whole bunch of old multiple choice things. You have your poetry quizzes you've got back. You got a midterm. We've taken a lot of other multiple choices, certainly beyond those. Take a look at those passages and those questions, and you can kind of get a sense as to how the wording works. Traditionally, on an AP exam, they usually don't ask specific questions, but they make more of statements, and you have to correctly answer, kind of complete the statement. Doesn't matter to me whether you put it in a question form or if you make it as a statement. That's entirely up to you. The hope is you take a look at a multiple choice passage. You're coming up with it. You're coming up with the questions. You're kind of switching lenses, as I said, from going from test taker to test maker. The hope is as you familiarize yourself with the types of questions that they ask, you're more ready for them as we're moving forward. I don't think necessarily you'll all of a sudden for your poetry quizzes, lights will go on and figure everything out. But I think by the time we come back to our next prose questions and passages that we deal with, between this and some of the poetry stuff that we've done, I think folks would be a lot more comfortable and confident with answering those. On the last couple pages, I gave you a sample that was done. This is not meant to be a perfect A+ sample, do everything that this group does. Some things they do well, some things they don't do so well. The passage that they're pulling from is the jungle, so some of you have read it, some of you haven't, so if you're unfamiliar with the passage, because you haven't read the jungle, that's certainly understandable. For the most part, though, it certainly looks the part where they got the formatting, you have the line numbers, and then you see you have the questions down here, A through E. They put an asterisk identifying what the correct answers would be. There is a problem with their passage itself, though, that they have in the formatting with it. They got their line numbers. What line comes after 35? You were quicker than first period. That's good. And then you would have 37. Problem is, you go to column number 2, you got line 40. If you go backwards, 39, 38, 37, 36. So if you were identifying something that happens in line 36 or 37, I don't know which one it is, that ends up being a problem. So they just didn't cut their first column, close enough. They should have cut those last 2 lines, copy and paste into the second column, and then they would be fine. So their passage should be like 2 lines long. No, you're not going to get a 0 out of 30 points or anything like that, but it'd be a point deduction, that would, get taken off that you should have been able to have. For the most part, their questions are pretty good. They do have some that kind of gets tough to figure out, where does this fit in relationship to like a purpose question or an effect question and things like that. Number 2 is a pretty good effect question. Which of the following best describes the effect of the independent clause at the end of paragraph 1? That one does work pretty well. So I like how they kind of had that one worded. But you can see they're coming up with answer choices. You have a couple different literary techniques that you're looking at. They did go with a Roman numeral question here for number 4, which is perfectly fine. And that gives you some flexibility as to how you would go about, answering those questions with combining some answers. And they do have, like number 7, they have an accept question. And you know this, that accept generally is going to show up in all caps when it comes up on a test. So you certainly want to highlight that so it tries not to get slipped past your fake AP test. Come up with a passage, 12 questions. You just got to make sure you come up with those 9 type. You know which 3 purpose, literary technique, effect. Those are the ones that are going to get doubled up. Everything else is just one type of question. That's probably the most common mistake that folks will make. It's not having 2 lines of 36 and 37. It's probably that all the questions get put into the Google Doc by, Bobby does his, and then Byron does his, and so on and so forth, and then somebody forgets to put them in chronological order. So if you do have questions, 1 deals with lines 35 to 40, question 2 is taking you to 12 to 15, question 3 is going back up into the 50s, that ends up being problematic. So those little things, you would just want to make sure that they're taken care of, but again, you're going to have a whole period Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday. You'll have over half the period on Thursday. You'll just have to take care of the poetry quiz for the first 15 minutes of class. Otherwise, laptops will be in here all week. Tomorrow and Wednesday, these are the laptops that Mr. Burns' class uses. We're using the normal ones that I have in the library with 10th grade. By Thursday, our normal ones will be back here. So the ones that you were using earlier in the year for synthesis and revision assistant, we don't have those computers yet. So tomorrow it'll take a little bit to log on, but once you use that same computer multiple times, it shouldn't be an issue. Any issues? Okay. Spend your time, do your awkward looks at one another, figure out if you're working together. If you need to sign out, like another copy of Gatsby or Catcher in the Rye and stuff like that, I think I have mostly everything in here. If I'm missing anything, I can get another copy that you'll be able to sign out. Expository chapters for Grapes of Wrath tend to be pretty good. Mention things like Birmingham Jail, Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, Swift's Passage, Modest Proposal within Bedford Reader. All of those things work. There's nothing wrong with using fiction, but I think nonfiction sometimes just tends to be a little bit easier. If you go with fiction, I would try to avoid a lot of dialogue. Like if you were doing grandma and misfit conversation, because it's so much dialogue back and forth, it eats up line numbers, and you usually don't get as much word count and content to deal with. So you certainly can go with fiction, but I think a chief mental description or something going on in Holden's head would work better than actual dialogue among multiple characters. Okay, figure out what it is you want to do. Plan would be tomorrow. We can start it.
Anybody want to do LeBron's letter with me?
That was an AP reading that we did.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Oh,
You probably won't get the whole letter in.